I want to welcome you to the first lecture in the 19th annual, it's hard to believe it, but the 19th annual community lecture series. Almost 20 years ago now, I guess, Kitty Robbins, who's just walking in, and her friend Ann Boone were out for a momentous hike, and they just decided, let's start up a lecture series. And the rest is history. I don't know exactly when they decided to put it in the February to March bridge period, but I think it was because it's the bleak midwinter and everyone needed something to do. So welcome to the perfect evening for the lecture series, and I'm really glad that you're all here for this exciting time. As you all know, if you've been here before, my main task is to ask you to turn off your cell phones in case you have forgotten to do so. And I will get to a brief introduction to our speaker, but I always tell people that the reason they invite me back is that I give very brief introductions. So I intend to stick by that today. As usual, we are being filmed by MCAT, and as usual, our series will be televised on MCAT. We will know at the end of the series exactly what the schedule will be, and you can always, of course, consult the Alumni Association. Once they know the schedule for the televising, they will be able to let you know as well. So thanks everybody for being here. I think that's all I have to say in a logistic sort of way. I now want just to introduce to you tonight's speaker. This is a very exciting series. I really am not quite sure what's going on in this series, so I'm going to show up every week and just try to figure out what happens. I'm retired, so I don't have to. It's fine by me. It's a great life, by the way. But in any case, so our first speaker in this series, which is about health and medicine, is Professor Reed Humphrey. You can read a lot about Professor Humphrey's career right there in your program, and I'm not going to repeat all of that. You'll see that his work has won him awards, and we're very, very fortunate to have him here at the University of Montana, where he serves as the dean and also the director of a new initiative called the Health and Medicine Initiative. He's going to be explaining to you what that means as he begins his lecture tonight, and our format will be as always, that is 50 or 60 minutes of Professor Humphrey, and then time for a free-for-all for questions and answers and conversation. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Professor Humphrey and take away my mic, and let's welcome him, please.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks for coming. And I see a lot of good friends, no nemesis yet, although Chris slipped in the side door there, I just said. But, I'm delighted that you took the time to come tonight. Let me kick this series off. Linda already offered me $5 if I told the audience that 2 hours per day of exercise was not necessary to achieve important outcomes. I'll be collecting on the way out. So, in fact, I'm not above taking bribes at higher levels. So if you feel like you want to kick in, that would be perfectly good. Before I get started, or maybe this is getting started, but I did want to talk to you just for a second about the Health and Medicine Initiative, which is an initiative we started on this campus a better part of a year ago. And it doesn't change anything structurally at the University of Montana. But what it does do is bring all of the health-related programs, clinics, laboratories, and experiences into the same web portal. Linda said, don't talk about web portals. I can't. You're already over my limit on the web when you get to portal. But it is a portal. www.umt.edu/UMHM, and you're there. And when I arrived at the university, I've been here 11 years. I came here as chair of the physical therapy program back in 2006, and then became dean 3 years ago. And when I arrived in '06, after kind of a longer career in the East Coast, mostly in Medical College of Virginia, I appreciated that there were like a lot of really good programs on this campus, but that they grew up organically in different colleges, psychology and in the humanities, and of course the biology and chemistry and the pre-medical sciences across the campus, and communication and speech disorders in the College of Education. My college is mostly the post-baccalaureate programs in public health and pharmacy and social work, physical therapy, and our family practice residency program in town. And what I began to appreciate was if a kid was interested in the University of Montana for a career in the health professions or the biomedical sciences, that they or their parents or their counselors, for that matter, really had to do a lot of forensics on the web to find the program of interest. So what this initiative does, it brings it into one portal. And I say that with real intention, because every time I have an opportunity to talk to a community group, and this is as large a community group as I've been able to talk to, I'd encourage you to explore what the initiative is, but most importantly, what lives on this campus. Because if you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle of a kid who's thinking about a career in health and medicine, whether to be a physician or enter one of the post-baccalaureate careers or become a clinical psychologist, they're going to need to go, almost all of them are going to need to go to graduate school. Now, we do have 8 robust programs on the Missoula College campus as well for kids who are going straight into the workforce. But for the longer haul, you're going to need more than a 3.9 average. You're going to need experiences. Kids need experiences in clinics. They need experiences in undergraduate research to round out that application that makes them competitive for wherever they go next. And there's no university in this state, and in fact, frankly, in some of the neighboring states, that have as many robust experiences as we do on this campus. We have 7 clinics on this campus where we see patients in front of students, and we teach students in front of patients. And that's really pretty unparalleled. So this initiative was designed to bring those programs all together. As I said at the outset, it doesn't change anything structurally. The programs still live in their college, in their respective colleges, but now we have a way of communicating to the public and to each other so we can build better programming. And the last thing I'll say about it is, this is the landing page when you get there. But if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a spot where you can become part of our community of learners. Now, our community of learners is largely, at the outset, freshmen and some matriculating students who've matriculated the last couple of years in sort of sophomores and juniors, and they're interested in careers. And so what we've done is we reached out to all the incoming freshmen, and then we reach out to all the existing students, and then they opt in. And then what we do is push information out to them about what healthcare is like now, what we think healthcare is going to look like, where the jobs are, where the opportunities are, and when we come across, for example, interesting podcasts that we think would be helpful to them so they can make good early career choices, it's there for them. So we push that out to them. So if you want to see what we're doing, join the community. All you have to do is plug in your email, and I start annoying you almost immediately. Okay, and there's also actually off to the right at the bottom of that web page. There's also we have an archive of the previous notes that we've sent out. They're just not email blasts. They're really quite nicely done. It's a pretty nice format. So, but that's what the initiative is about. It's driven by a group of deans and others and faculty on this campus to create a better environment for the health sciences and for the health professions. So with that, that's right, I have a talk to give tonight. That's right. Yeah, this is the first of the series. And the UM Health and Medicine Initiative, of course, was kind of rooted in like why we went in this direction for this particular series. And I'm really excited about the subsequent lectures and community discussions we're going to have on really important topics. What I'm going to talk about tonight may or may not have anything to do with the title. That's my prerogative. So, but I would suggest to you that if you are of the type that believes in reincarnation, you might choose to come back as a Great Basin bristlecone pine, which is the oldest living organism on the planet, nearly 5,000 years of age. And this is in eastern California, the bristlecone pines. And so they've been around a long time. If you'd prefer not to come back as a bristlecone, now I don't know how many believe. We could do active learning. Say, how many believe in reincarnation? You don't have to put your hands up. Most people would like to come back as something, but one of my favorite quotes was John Kenneth Galbraith, who was asked what he would like to come back as. And he said, I prefer not to come back. That's pretty cool, you know? Or you might remember Jean-Louis Calment, who does have the record, if you want to call it a record, I guess, for the longest documented living individual. You might remember the story. Some of you will remember the story about Jean-Louis, who died at 122. This is her 121st birthday, obviously. Here, blow out those candles. But when she was 90, lived in Paris. She had a flat in Paris. She had no heirs to leave her flat to. So apparently it's customary that that in situations like that, you can sell your flat to someone and they pay you a monthly rent until such time that you pass away, and then that person assumes ownership of the flat. So she sold it to a 47-year-old individual, André Raffet. So André Raffet started making his payments to Ms. Calment when he was 47 and she's 90. Now, come on, you've got to believe. Everyone in here has got to believe, like, this has got to be a good deal for me. I'm 47, she's 90. What's the worst that could happen? She went to his funeral, of course. He died at 77, cancer, unfortunately, so he only lived another 30 years, but for 30 years he paid rent to Ms. Calment as she aged to 100, 110, 120. And actually, when she attended his funeral, they asked her about it, and her response was, and you can look it up, she said her response was, sometimes in life, you just make bad deals. It's an incredible story. I got living 120 years. A couple of caveats. What I'm not going to talk about. There are a host of factors that contribute to both compressing morbidity, and that's a term I want to come back to momentarily, and improving mortality or death, including access to care, family and community social support, eating a plant-based diet, frequent consumptions of legumes and nuts, and psychological and spiritual wellness. Now, there's a couple of reasons that I'm not going to get after that. One is because I'm limited in the amount of time I have to talk with you tonight. Number two, I know very little about any of these areas. And number three, they really are pretty much a slam dunk in the science. There's not a lot of controversy. There's not a lot of myths about these principles. I mean, they're as solid as a 25-point lead in the Super Bowl. I mean, so anyway, I'm not going there. But so I'm from Pittsburgh. Do you think I wanted New England to win that game? For goodness sakes. Please remain in your seats. I am fragile. So, but I will talk about some things that where they're not necessarily myths per se, but that's what dragged you into the room. But where I think there are important misconceptions. So I want to talk about some of the things that we know about lifestyle and longevity that complement the variables that I just identified here. I want to talk a little bit about public health policy for a moment. That's like, please don't fall asleep when I say those words. You'll be okay. You'll be okay, Linnea. And then I'll try to leave you with a little bit of controversy just for fun. So with that, some things we know with some certainty. It's really important to choose your parents wisely. Genetics have a powerful, maybe the most powerful impact, of course, on longevity as any of the other factors. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that if a family is rife with a non-communicable disease that their children are destined to have that. When I was practicing in Richmond, Virginia, where in the southeast United States, where there's such a high rate of obesity and diabetes, and I had patients who would say, my mama has the sugar, and so I'm going to get the sugar. Like, you don't have to get the sugar. Diabetes, right? You don't have to get the sugar. Actually, there are things that you can do, actually, and that I think, well, in fact, there's some really good science that shows with just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, we can really push this off. No, I don't think so. No. My family's got it. I'm going to get it too. Like, okay. In the readiness for change, purely contemplative. Okay, maybe just plain out resistant. So now, of course, I would pick the Gates family because if you want to pick parents, why not pick the world's wealthiest people? But of course, they also, but parent relationships to their children and that family social network is really very important, and that exhausts my knowledge of social support. So there you go. Other things that we know with some certainty. Actually, I didn't make that phrase up. We were discussing habit will kill you. Is that any reason to stop? It's an addictive behavior. So it's a very pervasive risk factor that, as you can see, back in the, and I see a number of people in the audience that will remember when 50% of the American population was smoking. And we smoked on TV, and they smoked in commercials. And sports people promoted, Chesterfield was like the king of using personalities to push tobacco. But the other tobacco companies came in line. There's Lucky with Frank Gifford, and of course Say Hey. I never saw him smoke in the outfield, but I'm just presuming that he did. And of course, actually the quote that was on there that was kind of like a little off-putting, perhaps for some, was actually a cover quote with this particular picture of Ronald Reagan. But I think it was Prevention Magazine, but I had dickens of a time finding it, so I can't really make that attribution. But there's Bob Hope, and there's the military, but we know that smoking is a terrible, terrible habit and a pervasive risk factor. And I'll come back to risk factors in a few moments as it relates to longevity and premature chronic disease. But the other thing, managing your blood pressure is wise. Hypertension remains a very, very persistent problem, medical problem in the United States. In fact, as you'll see, it's almost enjoying a bit of a rebound, if you will, in terms of the prevalence in the population. I love this. Actually, early in my career, there was a great article, I think it was in Scientific American, about how giraffes regulate their blood pressure. So you might be thinking that the giraffe is spread his front legs so he can reach the water. But in fact, that lowers the giraffe's blood pressure. If the giraffe kept its legs directly in front of it, it would probably have a hemorrhagic stroke. So, but managing, of course, hypertension, cigarette smoking, genetics, critical factors, some of which you can imagine would be relative to chronic disease. You know, there's a couple things that ring true to me as a native Pittsburgher with a mother who was a steel worker. I love this. We know that environmental and occupational exposure matters. And of course, what I love about this slide is, nothing like being on the edge of the beam, 40 stories up, and it's about time for my cigarette for the afternoon. So, those things matter. We know those with certainty. Now, I only have like 50 more slides just like this one. So if you'll just bear with me. But there is something I just want to get out there right away, because this was such an important study that was done. And I won't go back and talk about study after study, but I will reflect on what the science tells us about prevention of chronic disease and extending life. Some people always say, longevity is great, but just tacking the years on at the end. Like, yeah, but that's true. You're attacking them on at the very end. But it's that compression of morbidity that really matters, and quality of life. And we'll come back to that. But But this was a study that involved nearly 650,000 individuals. So they looked at 6 different studies. It was published back in, where are we, 2012. But here's just some really important take-home points, and then we'll come back and talk about this later. But a physical activity level equivalent to brisk walking for about 75 minutes per week was associated with a gain of about 1.8 years in life expectancy relative to no leisure time activity. Activity that got to the World Health Organization recommended a minimum of 150 minutes brisk walking ended up with about 3.4 to 4.5 years in overall gain in life expectancy. Physical activity and life expectancy association was also evident at all body mass index levels. I'll come back to that. So is he ever going to get to? Yeah, I'll be back to that too. Being active and normal weight was associated with a gain of 7.2 years of life compared to being inactive and obese, and I'll talk about that as well. However, being inactive but normal weight was associated with a 3.1 fewer years of life compared to being active but obese. Some real important take-home messages there. We'll revisit that momentarily about the power of physical activity as it's associated with weight and body mass. For those who didn't want to read all those points, here's the simple visual take-home of this. Here's the hazard ratio of mortality, which no one cares about, but here's what we really care about. Years of life gained in this cohort study. And you'll see it's kind of curvilinear, it goes up pretty steeply around 3 or 4 met hours per week. And then this is called met hours per week. You're like, what's that? So what this equates to is about 10 met hours per week is roughly about 30 minutes of brisk walking 5 days a week. We'll get you there. If you go home and Google met hours, then you can learn all about it, about different activities and the amount of time it takes to get an hour to an hour value. So you can select from a lot of different activities. And that's what this study looked at, were a lot of different leisure time activities. But there are really important thresholds. You have 650,000 people to look at. You can get some pretty robust findings. And you can see, yeah, you can get more by doing more. This is where I earned my $5, Linda. But you can see that it's kind of like the return on investment is pretty modest. Okay, so although people who exercise upwards of 45 minutes to an hour a day really live largely right up in this neighborhood. Okay, so physical activity has a very powerful effect. But the key phrase that I want to emphasize is compression of morbidity. This actually was a phrase developed by a physician in San Diego, James Fries, probably 25 years ago. And I love it because that's what we all strive for. Yeah, we would all love to live as long as possible, but the compression of morbidity is living as long as possible and dying at the last possible. It's like having your event that causes your death right at that last possible moment. Your first event, your first problem with chronic disease, a myocardial infarction, heart attack, that occurs on the squash court at 95. That's compressing your morbidity. Expanding your morbidity is when someone has a medical issue, heart attack, onset of diabetes, COPD, lung disease, in their 40s or in their late 30s, and they still are looking at 30 or 40 years of life where they will be ill and managed and in the healthcare system. And so while there is good evidence for longevity improvement, the real payoff, of course, is in the quality of life that one gets by engaging in positive health behaviors. Like some of you are thinking, did I really need to come up all the way to the UC to hear that? I already knew that. Right? I knew that if I engaged in better health behaviors, that I'd be less likely to visit the hospital. So, but I do want to talk about a couple of things where I believe there are important misconceptions and has driven public policy in the wrong direction. Well, I shouldn't say public policy, public opinion and consumerism in the wrong direction. This is from 2003, man's fat is man's fate, the shape of things to come. I always find it interesting that, it's very Neanderthal-like, and then you get to this guy, and he's the only one in this cartoon who has a diaper on. while he's drinking a big gulp. I don't really, I don't know. I guess it's just better for all of us that he has a diaper on, I suppose. But the point, the message is that man's fat is man's fate, or a female's fat is her fate. Carbon-based life form fat is their fate. And that is not particularly accurate. Mass does matter, and we'll talk about that just briefly. Mass does matter, but excess body mass is just the visual manifestation of a host of other lifestyle factors that contribute to the accumulation of excess mass. It's not, but as we know, there's billions of dollars that's made annually on to reduce body mass by whatever means necessary, as long as it doesn't involve physical activity or reasonable dieting. In fact, one of my favorites was the commercial. It's been a few years now where the person comes on and they say, "This medicine is so powerful that we don't recommend it to anyone who's just a little overweight. You have to be really overweight to take this medicine. So it's just for you. But you can buy it too if you want to. But it's really, really powerful." So, and of course, it doesn't work, of course. But this message that this planet, because it is a worldwide problem, but there are other behaviors that are worldwide problems that contribute to obesity, underscores this penchant to reduce mass for social reasons as well as health reasons. I think we all appreciate that. And yes, we do lead the planet still in terms of individuals who are obese. This is actually 2009 data, but here's the US right at the very top. Mexico, and a little wall right here. You can see a little wall right there. Yeah, I should have put that in, actually. But, except it would actually, maybe it would have been prophetic because it separates Mexico, but also the rest of the world. That's okay, too. But yeah, so we're still out there, and but this is a worldwide problem, if you will, if you accept that excess mass. And this is based on, again, body mass index. So we're going to get to that right now. So how much mass, you notice I'm not saying fat, but how much mass, predominantly fat, is too much, right? Because this is important. Okay, so rewind, brown hair, graduate school, Pittsburgh, a long time ago. I'm in the exercise physiology graduate program, and prior to that, many of you might remember that this all started with the Metropolitan Height and Weight Scales. Actuaries would do the analysis and they would say, heavy people die sooner, right? So they developed tables. They developed tables for height and weight. And then myself and all of my colleagues came upon this and said, oh, no, it's not about height and weight, really. That discriminates against people who have a lot of lean mass and are very big, but are otherwise healthy. And they shouldn't have to pay higher insurance rates. And that's not the reason that we went to body composition analysis, but it was right there. So as you look at this particular slide, it could do a little active learning here too, I suppose. It's my wife. Is active learning okay to just put your hand up? Is that all right? That's not really active, okay. Well, it's kind of active. There's just no learning involved, right? Yeah. But these are all ways to measure body composition, fat in the body, right? There is hydrostatic weighing, or what's known as underwater weighing. Anybody done underwater weighing? Oh, yeah. Okay. And you'll note, actually, this is an old photograph, because when we started, it was kind of macabre, but we actually used autopsy scales to weigh people in the water, because autopsy scales are very good to weigh bones and tissue on. So he says, well, we'll just hook it up to its seat and we'll submerge people and see how because fat's displaced, Archimedes' principle, fat gets displaced, we can figure out a little calculation, figure out how much body fat there is, how much lean mass there is, and we can tell people, instead of using those old Metropolitan tables, now they can simply look at their real data, like your data on how much body fat you have. And then we developed thresholds for what's acceptable, 20% or less, or 25% or less, and 30% was too much. It never was able to tie any of that to actual health outcomes, but it was really, it was so much more sophisticated to look at body composition that way. So that progressed. So these are other things. So there's a hydrostatic weighing, which for those who've had it, it is not an easy technique. You've got to blow all your air out as you sink into the water and then remain motionless while we get the weight. Now we use load cells now, so it's a lot easier, but it's still a pretty barbaric way to assess mass. And it's interesting because this works really well. As I like to say, almost all of these techniques work really well for people who don't need it. Athletes, people who are very lean because they sink right in the water. If you carry a lot of fat mass around, sometimes you have to actually put extra weight to submerge the individual. So it was pretty archaic. So here's a very happy fellow who's in a whole body plethysmograph. That just uses air displacement as another way to look at body composition. It works really well. This is the gold standard, DEXA, which is dual X-ray absorptometry, which is very low exposure and can get looks at segmental deposits of fat and so forth. Then, of course, many of you have probably had skin fold analysis or fat fold analysis based on the fact that about half of our body fat's right beneath the skin, and we use regression as an equation for that. And then a very popular method is bioelectrical impedance, where an electrode is placed, as you can see, on the individual's wrist and one on the ankle, and they look at the flow of current through the body. Yeah, it's just like that. Like Frankenstein, just introduce a lot of current. And if the patient survives, you can give them their results immediately. Now, it's actually completely painless, of course. But the fat and lean tissue and water they have different impedance levels so that we are able to, again, determine the amount of body fatness based on that. And how many of you don't actually have to admit to this, but a number of you may have a scale that tells you your body fat. Tanita makes it. You step on it, and your weight's there. But then it also tells you, for that moment, what your percent body fat is for the day. And you're like, and I always thought that they should really have a scale that just like groans when you step on it, like, oh, Reed, you're a lot heavier than you were yesterday. You need to think. But the key to this is body water. So, and this is a real conundrum, or in some regards, sort of a catch-22 for physiologists, because when somebody would come to my lab and say, "Hey, well, let's say this bioimpedance analyzer, we can really rapidly calculate body fatness and excess mass," and so my response, like anybody else's, would be, "Well, is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it valid?" And they would say, "Well, yeah, I've got this whole raft of papers that show you that demonstrates that it is." And that's the catch-22, because the studies that validated this equipment were done in under very strict laboratory conditions. So the body water, which is the real variable there, is really stable. But I like to tell the story. I was in Idaho a number of years ago. I was walking through the county fair in Blackfoot County, and there was a health screening for some reason, and they had a bioimpedance analyzer. And as I walked by, they said, "Hey, would you like your body fat measured?" I'm like, "All right, I'll do that." And of course, and what do you do? I'm like, "Oh, I don't do anything. I'm not gonna." And so I laid down on a plinth. They put the electrodes on, and it's the fair. You have more liquids than food sometimes, and so I came out at like 51% body fat. And the technician, so she gives this little readout. It's like, "Well, Mr. Humphrey, you are 51% body fat today, and your ideal, and based on this, your ideal weight is 103 pounds." And like, is this right? She said, "That's what the instrument said." Like, okay, I'll just go have my legs removed, and then I can get to my ideal body weight. So there's a note of caution with bioimpedance analyzers, right? And that is you've got to follow the studies actually. So, but with all of this technology available to us, and with all due respect and to my colleagues in X-ray science, because I'm one of those guys. In fact, when it comes to health, compression of morbidity, mortality, and longevity, it's really back to the future, and that is body mass index, which is a height and weight calculation. And we just accept that The Rock and Sylvester Stallone. And other people who are just like really big but all lean are just like, they're just outliers. Because when you use this as a population measure, you really do begin to get really important information about a person's health. And yes, of course, because we'll all be going back to metric anytime soon. I bet there are people here, because I'm old enough, I remember when we had dual speed signs, dual speed limit signs in the United States. It gave us kilometers per hour. Like, we actually tried this for a while back in the 60s, and then we're like, Europe can have it. We're going to keep. But it's weight in kilograms divided your height in meters squared, because you know your height in meters squared. Of course you do. But you can just do this on the web now. Body mass index calculator, boop, pops right up on you. Plug in your height and your weight, and it does all the rest for you. And this is somebody who weighs 175 pounds. They're 66, 5 feet 6, and their body mass index is 28.2. What does that mean? It simply means that body mass index in that category of 28 put that individual in the overweight category. So there's underweight, which there's a J-shaped curve there with mortality. People who are really low weight have a higher mortality risk, usually associated with malnutrition. But then you get into more of a linear relationship in there. So if you're between 18.5 and about 25, it's considered normal. And then you can see here's an overweight category. And here's those, earlier I talked about class 1 and class 2 obesity. So these different levels. And here's health. And then we can talk a little bit about health risk. I'm going to come back just a little bit later and talk about waist circumference also. But body mass index actually is a far more powerful indicator of mortality risk. This is the curve for normal individuals over time, because people don't live forever. So this is the curve you expect to see in normal weight, normal BMI category. Here is the curve for overweight, the blue, and you can see, okay, there's certainly a mortality, there's an increased mortality with that. And here's our class 1 obesity. I didn't look at class 2 or morbidly obese, which is a body mass index of 40 or greater. But there is this, and these are all people who had low cardiorespiratory fitness to begin with. Okay, so they're all about the same otherwise. And when they're about the same otherwise, you do see an increased risk of mortality in people who have excess mass by body mass index. We can't do that kind of analysis for percent body fatness. It's just never really actually been played out well. So we look at BMI in a really robust kind of way. So I want to talk just for a second about this fitness and fatness issue. And the answer is obvious, because we've already pretty much alluded to that. How much does physical activity influence health outcomes in the face of increased body mass? So there's some big number studies that have been out there, and they tell an interesting story. This was one that I love, one of the ones I like the most, or I wouldn't have it up here. Nearly 10,000 subjects in this particular study. And here they looked at two things. They looked at body mass index. So here's our normal, less than 25, our normal body mass index groups. So they took 10,000 people, they divided them into three physical activity categories. They gave them questionnaires, detailed questionnaires, and they said, all right, looked at everything, and they said, here's the least active third, the moderately active third, and the most active third. No other magic there, just in terms of leisure time physical activity. And then, so they looked at, again, they looked at body mass. Here's overweight, and here's obese. And then they also looked at these activity levels. And we started to see some things that make sense, right? So if you look simply at those who are least active, at least the third of people who are least active, those who were the leanest had the lowest mortality risk. And then and it sort of went up in a stepwise configuration, just as you might expect. People are heavier, all in the same activity category. And you see the same across each activity category. So activity level certainly does matter. Now, I'm sorry, cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease risk, sorry. So we flip the arrows around. Same scenario here, but now we look at within the body mass index levels, like these. So now we're looking across the obesity groups. And again, what you can see is least active, heaviest, highest risk for mortality, and then it drops down to most active, still obese, clear benefit. And that happens at each of the body mass index categories. The last piece to this is maybe the most important. And that is that the least active, normal weight individuals at 3,000, a cohort of about 3,000, had about the same, essentially the same risk of premature mortality as the obese individuals who had the highest activity level. So is it possible to be fat and fit? Absolutely. More importantly, the drive to reduce body mass for health reasons, if reducing body mass for health reasons is the primary driver, then physical activity becomes a very powerful influence on health outcomes. Now, it's true, as people are more physically active, they typically do lose weight. But there are plenty of studies that have shown that even for people who have not lost weight, an increase in their fitness and their physical activity levels confers both a morbidity and a mortality benefit. There's really powerful stuff there. But here's what I want to shout out to my colleagues who did these body composition studies, because body composition was about the whole body, right? Head to toe, percent body fatness. And then we have body mass index, which just looks at gross mass. And it's all about a location. Go all the way back to Jean Vague. I know that some French people would say, or some people who are perhaps not happy with the French would say, don't you mean vague? Like, no, it's Vague. Okay. I'm sure when he was at a cocktail party, he said, good evening, my name is Jean Vague. It wasn't like, I am John Vague. Like, no one wants to be vague. But he in 1954, he published this paper where he looked at the apple and the pear. And for those of us who go back a ways, you'll remember the apple and pear, right? And what he discovered in his practice was that individuals who centralized their weight had a much higher risk of in his case, gout and other metabolic disease than those who had large hips and small waists. Apple, pear. And the metabolic syndrome, which looks at overall obesity, but centralized obesity. And what we've discovered, of course, is that a lot of sort of like the atherogenic, or the atherosclerosis engine, if you will, lives in this body. So body shape really matters. I think the next one is I'm going to talk about waist circumference then as a measure. So, okay, you're with me, like body mass index, got it figured out. Combine that physical activity, changes health outcomes, improves morbidity, perhaps longevity, first slide. The central obesity seems to matter. So now it's like, if you really want to know the most powerful indicator, non-invasive indicator of metabolic risk for chronic disease, diabetes, stroke, heart disease, is simply waist circumference. It is more powerful than BMI, but when you combine it with body mass index, it reveals the most information to individuals. It's like, oh my gosh, we've gone like full circle. We started with a scale and a stadiometer, which is the thing on, that's my favorite trivia thing. It's a stadiometer is the height thing that measures your height. To body composition analysis, sophisticated body composition analysis. But if it's about health, if that's the outcome, if it's about athletic performance and decreasing your body mass, body mass you can get from point A to point B, so Nordic skiers and cross-country runners and swimmers can get back and forth quickly. Yeah, you want to minimize body fatness. Body composition, yeah, good tool, okay? You can really sort of winnow it down. But for health and chronic disease, body mass index, but waist circumference is, paper after paper have demonstrated this now. And sorry I did put this in centimeters, but you can look at health risk based on body mass index, but because body mass index doesn't account for location of body fat, we add to that waist circumference, and you get a very powerful indicator of health risk. Now again, these are populations, so this is like if you have an increase, you find yourself in like the increased risk category, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't go out and buy any long playing CDs or sets of movies, you know, because you're just in now with a large group of individuals who are more likely to have a problem. Okay, but it's just like genetics. It's not a sentence per se. So last, this is sort of like a bit of a busy slide here, but I wanted to show you again. This was a paper that was published that looked at nearly 27,000 participants. It was across 52 countries. And they were looking at risk of heart attack associated with increasing waist and hip circumference. I don't show you the hip circumference thing. It's down here because I wanted to point out the powerful effect that increasing waist circumference had on risk. So they took these 27,000 people. They looked at their waist circumferences, and then they divided them into 5 different groups. Lowest group all the way up to the highest group, to the biggest waist circumference. And you can see as you move from the smallest waist circumference to the biggest waist circumference, with one being just average risk, how steeply the curve becomes in risk of a heart attack. So when you think about reduction in body mass, and when you think about body mass as a factor, think in terms of simple. Waist circumference, body mass index, height and weight, and then the influence of physical activity. One of my favorite quotes, the Earl of Derby. I don't know why I say it that way. It just seems like when you say the Earl of Derby, it should go. I have somebody who wants to ask a question.
Well, I'm just wondering about your units on that.
Centimeters.
35 centimeters?
Yeah. I can. So these are, these are centimeters, 2.5 centimeters to an inch, right?
13 inches?
Oh, those are inches. Sorry, that was inches. You know, thanks for pointing that out. You know, if ever I get through a lecture without having a slide that's screwed up. By the way, I'm attributing that to one of my colleagues because I stole that slide from one of my colleagues. I'm like, oh, there's that nice table, and I plugged it right in there. Yeah, you know, I'm plausible deniability, but those were inches, and I'm happy to share any of this with anybody, by the way. But let me get back to physical activity so that I can entertain more difficult questions. Yeah, I don't know. This is a slide that shows, like, you know, where the population lives, you know, and I saw this, and it was actually about energy use in the world, and I looked at it, and from where I sit, I'm like, you know what that looks like to me? That looks like to me all the places on the planet where people aren't doing anything. Because this is a worldwide problem, physical activity. So see, I made that like quick shift back, 2 steps back, 1 step forward to physical activity again. But both developed from both developed and developing countries, not physically active enough to gain health benefits. So you can go to the World Health Organization website to appreciate that this is not a U.S. issue. This is a worldwide problem. There's a really robust amount of data that shows that every developing country and a lot of the developed and developing countries are experiencing an enormous reduction in voluntary physical activity because as societies become more and more industrialized and modern, people are doing less and less. I was in Tanzania a number of years ago and observed the Maasai warriors, you know, who still dressed in their traditional garb, but they've got nothing to do, and they just sort of sit around. Like, what do you want to do? I don't know. Nobody goes for a walk because it's too hot. Like, you know, there's nobody to fight, so I guess we'll just stay in our costumes and we'll play cards. And they did. But this is a problem, again, that is, and you can see the magnitude of the problem. Prevalence of insufficient physical activity. This is the World Health Organization. Sorry, I know it says 2008. Don't shoot the messenger. I looked for more recent data. Don't have it. But at least on this level. So, but I can assure you, it's not better. and this is the prevalence of insufficient physical activity expressed as a percentage, and the threshold that they're using here is less than 5 times 30 minutes of moderate activity per week, or less than 3 times of 20 minutes of vigorous activity per week, or equivalent. That's been sort of the standard that the World Health Organization has adopted, and then we have as well. So because you ask the question like, well, what's the threshold? Like, how do you determine whether you're sufficiently active or not? And you can see that countries like Argentina and Saudi Arabia, above 60%, the UK, and there's really interesting data from the UK, but you can see that as it gets darker, these are countries where there's an enormous prevalence of physical inactivity. And I want to put that into perspective momentarily. This is a sort of a tabular illustration of some representative countries. But I want to put that into perspective for both the United States, Montana, but then also, what does it mean to have that level of inactivity? So this is actually the most recent data, 2014. And this is the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. I ask this every time I ever show a slide that's from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance study. Centers for Disease Control does it. I want to know, it's only happened once in my career so far, I want to know, who's been called? Put your hand up high. Who's been called by them? Nobody. One person at my last lecture said, I was called. Like, wow, somebody called you. Nobody answers the phone anymore anyway. But these are a long series of health questions. Do you smoke? Do you have diabetes? Have you ever been told this or that? What's your height? What's your weight? And so this is one of the questions. You can look it up. You can go to the CDC, BRFSS, and look up these questions. Percent of adults who engage in no leisure time physical activity. I mean none. Like, I'm not doing anything. Nothing. During the past month, other than your regular job, did you participate in any physical activities or exercise, running, calisthenics, golf, gardening, walking to exercise, adults over 18 years of age? And so the dark blue represents more than 28% of the population that did nothing when they got the phone call. And then the lighter blue is 24 to 28%. Here's Montana sitting around a little bit less than 20%. None of you got called. And so this gives you sort of like this big map of what the United States looks like on a lot of the health behaviors. This is no physical activity at all. I venture to say, just like the height and weight question, when you're on a phone call and it's completely anonymous, you gotta like be doing no activity to say no, because somebody's going to say, oh yeah, I've been running, yeah, that's me, I'm okay there, yeah, don't worry about it. They're going to track me on this phone device. So you know this is as low an estimate as you possibly can have. Okay? So the seed I want to plant is this then represents, to some degree, the lowest prevalence of an important risk factor. There's paper after paper after paper. I'll show you one of them, I think, that now shows that reveals that physical inactivity is as powerful a risk factor for premature chronic disease as elevated serum lipids like cholesterol. Very close, like right there with cigarette smoking and hypertension. Data's a little bit different here and there, but that's an important thing to think about. So hang on to that thought, because I'm not done. Montana, okay, that's people who said they don't do any physical activity. So now you have a gap. People who didn't do anything, and then people who do just enough to get a health benefit. Like what lies in between? Because that gives you more information about where the real risk factor is. And here's the only data that we have actually is 2011, 2013. Percent of adults who achieve at least 150 minutes. This is back to the WHO, World Health Organization minimum threshold. So how many meet the WHO criteria? So the health benefit threshold. And so here we have values of 55% and then 57%. So you can say, well, we're inching up. And there were 9,500, nearly 9,000 people who got the call on this. So it's random. So what that means, of course, is what that suggests to me, and I hope it would to you, is that in 2011, nearly 45% of the population wasn't exercising enough to achieve a health benefit. So it's a risk factor for them, like smoking, like hypertension, like elevated cholesterol. And it's a little better in 2013. So the prevalence of risk in the population is on the order of 40 to 45%. I think that's a pretty reasonable presumption. So, so before I talk about risk factors, I have one slide for you, and that is physical activity is important. We already talked about that, right? How much it can confer a health benefit. So you say, okay, what about changing my fitness? That is a measurable change, not just in doing the same thing every day, but actually changing your fitness so that you have a higher capacity, higher aerobic capacity. And just one quick slide from Steve Blair, who actually is going to come out here, I think, in April. A great friend and a superior epidemiologist. This shows the one quick slide there. Age-adjusted mortality. This is just for men. Sorry, it's the only slide I got on this. But it shows fitness level in METs. And again, one MET is the energy cost to sit comfortably at rest. So everybody, if I measured your energy expenditure rate in here right now, and billed you for it, of course, we'd have one MET. And so anybody who's doing twice that energy, expends twice that energy, is 2 METs, 3 times 3 METs, and so forth. The average, if we tested everybody in here, we'd probably have a pretty wide variance, but probably somewhere between 8 and 15 METs would be the capacity. But study after study in recent years has shown that if you can move from 8 to 10 METs, or from 6 to 8 to 10, as your fitness improves, your mortality risk significantly declines. So it's kind of like the take-home message would be physical activity matters, and reading the WHO minimum criteria matters. But if you achieve that and you have a mind and a will to engage in more breathless sort of activity to improve your fitness, because that's what it takes, because skeletal muscle says, thanks for the physical activity, feeling pretty good down here. If you want me to be more efficient, you got to like raise the temperature, okay? So fitness programs and exercise physiologists, fitness trainers who put people into programs to improve fitness result in a significant mortality benefit and also a significant compressed morbidity benefit, okay? Well, there should be more things on here. This is what I want to talk about next. I'm almost there, Linda. Hang in there. Prevalence thresholds of risk factors and what I call public health, and really broad efforts. The prevalence for smoking right now in the population is right around 20%. Used to be 50%. Hypertension hanging in around 30%. Serum cholesterol 15%. And for many in the audience, because I know your age, you will remember that, outside of choosing your parents wisely, the 3 most important things were to stop smoking if you were smoking, don't start, get your blood pressure under control, so know your number. There was a time when nobody knew what their blood pressure was. There was a time when the emergency techs would the EMTs, right? Normal systolic blood pressure is 100 plus your age, right? Now we know that everyone, all the guidelines have been bringing that down and down and down because blood pressure is so important. But everybody knows about blood pressure. Massive public education campaign. Smoking, same thing. Massive public education campaign, legislation to get ads out of the airways and off billboards. We were going to change this behavior. Physicians led the way, but there was a huge public health investment because this was a public health problem. So smoking, got it down 20%. Hypertension was up in the 30%, up in the mid-30s, brought that down. Now it's been creeping back a little bit. Serum cholesterol. Who knew about serum cholesterol 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Now everybody's like, they got to know your number. What's your number? And then now it's like, what's your fraction? What's your HDL? What's your LDL, right? So it's like, but that didn't come through like putting your head in a pillow. That came through public awareness and investment from the public health perspective to change those variables to reduce the risk of stroke and heart attack in diabetes in the United States. And it's been fantastic. One more quick thing. I've established, and it's been well established in the literature now, that physical inactivity, what we just talked about, is as powerful a risk factor, or should be considered to be nearly as powerful a risk factor, independent risk factor, as these 3. And what's the prevalence? Well, the prevalence in the United States, as we just defined in Montana alone, a 45% prevalence. If you look across the United States, and you look at real data, not just behavioral risk factor surveillance survey data, that risk factor is somewhere between 40 and 70% of the population. So it's a paradigm shift that I want you to think about, or I'd ask, beg you to think about, implore you to think about, encourage you to think about, is what does this mean? If you woke up tomorrow, well, tomorrow's promised to no one, remember, so longevity works slowly. Hang in there, everybody. I'll expect to see everybody here tomorrow. But you wake up tomorrow, what would we do if 70% of the population was hypertensive? What would we do if 70% of the population was smoking? Yeah, what would we do if the population suddenly had wild serum cholesterol levels? It would be a public health panic, and we would get after it. What do we do for physical inactivity, which is as powerful a risk factor? We get, you really should get some more exercise. You really should try to do that. Yeah, it'd be really nice to get some more activity because that would just be so much better. And by the way, let me write the script for your hypertension medication and your statin. Like, how many people are on a statin in here? Yeah. I mean, I get it. It comes for free. It's cheaper for me to take a simvastatin than it is for. I chose my parents poorly, by the way. But wonderful people, but I chose them poorly for that reason, and so I'm subject to familial hypercholesterolemia. So I take a statin, and it also makes my blood vessels happy, and I'm probably going to live hopefully a long and happy life. So statins are prevalent everywhere, and that's what's driven things down. Why lipids are almost inconsequential at this point, but physical inactivity doesn't get the same attention. Look at here's our prevalence risk factors from 1960 up through about 2012, and you can see the decline in serum cholesterol, largely related to pharmacotherapy. The decline in hypertension, but then creeping back, and the decline in the prevalence of smoking. And here's physical inactivity that hangs out there, and this country, as well as many other countries, their public health campaign is, we should do more. But if you don't, there's no real consequences. So I asked this, one of my final questions is what I call the directional, sorry about these big words, but directional independent amelioration of risk. Like, what happens when people are physically active? And we know that when we change muscle biology through activity, that, whoops, I gotta go back one. When we change muscle biology through activity, we know that, and there's plenty of published studies to show that we can reduce mild to moderate hypertension through physical activity alone. Add medication for severe hypertension, we're golden. We know that it will change the subfractions of lipids, HDL, LDL. It doesn't change serum cholesterol that much unless you lose weight too. Okay, so don't expect your serum cholesterol to fall with activity unless you lose weight. But you do change the subfractions around, and that's the more important piece. And there's actually some evidence that people who are physically active are less likely to go back to smoking if they quit. So we know that physical activity is so important in the direct amelioration of other risk factors. But if you turn it around, you said, all right, so let's change blood pressure. What will that do? With a medication. Will that change lipids? Will it change smoking behavior? And the answer, of course, is no. We have very targeted interventions for hypertension, for lipids, for smoking. And none of it, of course, is going to really influences muscle biology. So what I'm trying to convey here, of course, is that you have one intervention, physical activity, that can dramatically change the health profile of an individual, but targeted strategies are less effective. Now, this is a busy slide, so I'll just give you the take-home message. Part of the message tonight is personal. You think, okay, what can I do based on what Reed said that might change an outcome for me? But we have a bigger issue, and that's the issue of social responsibility. What do our neighbors do? What do our colleagues do? What do our friends do? Because that's where the social and economic burden of poor health lies. It lies with all of us. And so I would argue, and I think I'm right about this, that if you look at just singular interventions, and this is not calling out diet or nutritional strategies or specific medicines or surgeries or behavior change strategies, because they all have a place, and they all have relative value. But if you think about where a threshold might be that really can change the dial on a community, it actually is in physical activity, and to some degree, if you can improve fitness. If you can simply get people more active, you can significantly change the social and economic burden, and reduce the risk of chronic disease in a community. And by pushing that off, I used to always say, I mean, in the pooled insurance world, you know, if you, you know, if 15% of the population is ill, we can manage that. If 85% of the population is ill, we can't. Last thing I'm going to leave you with, and then we're done. Promise, promise, promise. No, not yet. No questions after I'm done. Hang on.
Actually, that was me.
Oh, okay. There's a question. I'm going to leave you with a little controversial thing. Stuart, you're going to love this. Okay? And that is, what do we know about this is a summary of the last slide, actually. You know, physical fitness, more so than physical activity, independently capable of optimizing health outcomes. Others have value. We can't leave those behind. But now I'd like to leave you with one last little, like, something to think about, okay? And that is what I call the biological conundrum of physical activity, where the behavioral and biological intersection is. And by that I mean, as the need, so I don't mean to read slides here, but as the need to hunt and gather diminished, that was a long time ago, except in certain parts of Montana. The activity requirement necessary to sustain health was replaced by an agrarian or industrialized effort along with pervasive physical stresses of travel and relocation. If you think about from the organized beginning of mankind, hunting, gathering, the pervasive stresses of moving. People died of influenza, of course, and they didn't age much. But everything was physically stressful. The critically necessary interlude of rest provided overwhelming physiological and psychological relief to largely involuntary physical stress. Anybody do a lot of snow shoveling over the weekend? Yeah. What felt really good when you were done? Besides that, rest. Like, oh my God, it feels so good to be alive. So you imagine that as evolving, as man and woman evolves, the daily physical stress, and then you get this break. I thought, oh my gosh, that feels pretty good. So as we resolve the requirements of thousands of years, you could be in the 6,000-year group, and that's okay too. That's still a long time. Or you could be in the many thousands of years group, and that's even better. But as we resolve those requirements of involuntary physical stress, because if you didn't get out there, you were eaten, right? So you had a reason to move. And really, this has just been 100 to 125 years now. Why in the world would we backfill the void with voluntary physical stress? In other words, you know, I would offer to you, just for fun, because nothing seems to be working right now worldwide with changing physical activity behavior, which I think I should have convinced you by now, one of the most powerful factors for changing health outcomes. I would argue, so let me just throw this out there, physical inactivity, rest, is biologically preferable to the involuntary physical stresses historically required to avoid being eaten or otherwise socially or economically disadvantaged. And I would argue that our engineered physiology over thousands of years is biologically confused. You know, subtracting half of our evolved psychophysiological paradigm can't provide for a biological offset to rest. In other words, and I love this because I would get this all the time as my career evolved. It's like, oh, you know, the body is willing and the brain is weak. And I would argue that the oft-stated presumption that humans crave physical activity is not supported by the available evidence. If you look at the World Health Organization data, prevalence of insufficient physical activity for health benefits, it simply doesn't stack up. In fact, we appear to crave rest, and apparently for well-founded reasons. Why wouldn't we crave rest? And by the way, this isn't an out for you. You still have to exercise. You can say, oh, this was just somebody's will that I should be resting all the time. In fact, so I think that you can see that thousands of years of biological adaptation to adapt to physical stress. It's more logical to think that to appreciate that perhaps it's just not as simple as you really should get some more activity. I've been very careful, and not because Stuart's here or because Chris is here or perhaps some other psychologists in the room. I didn't say that it was an addictive behavior, but the cardinal statement for addiction is the inability to stop doing something when you know it's good for you, right? And people know. I worked in cardiac rehabilitation for many years. A heart attack, pretty powerful motivator for people to change their behavior. And yet, even though those who go through rehabilitation programs are tuned in to the fact that they need to be physically active nearly daily, at least 3 or 4 times a week, nearly daily, and nearly 50% of them will drop out in the first year, and nearly 70% are out within several years. And that's for people who are trying to avoid death, right? And they get the message you need to be active because we show them all this data, oh yeah, I can see why that's really important, and then they don't comply. It's what is wrong? And I would argue that there's a strong behavioral component that counters the physiological balance that we need to be sufficiently active to reduce health risk. So this is a paper actually just came out, but and that's the message that I that I'm trying to get out there. So we need to think more intentionally as a population, because this is for everybody. We think more intentionally about important public health messaging and strategies that employ the best behavioral interventions that we have, motivational interviewing and readiness for change. Some things have been around for a long time, but lots of people still don't use those. But I would offer that the behavioral piece, but recognizing that it's important not just because it seems like a good idea, but because you're trying to move people from what I think is a very resistant position of change. And I believe with that, remember about longevity. We invented time. Not personally, of course, but we invented time. No other, critters know when it's light, when it's dark, and when it's cold, when it's hot. But we really are all about time. How much more time is it? Oh, I got to quit. Compressing morbidity to improve the quality and quantity of that time is largely in your control. But I would offer that you should offer that to your friends and colleagues as well. And finally, in any case, set reasonable goals. As long as you're as fast as this fella, you're probably going to be all right. And with that, I'll stop and take a few questions.
I'm glad to hear I don't have to do that 2 hours every day. Okay, so you know the drill. We have 2 people with mics. Hold up your hand, and we'll get to the questions. Okay, so where's the first one? Okay.
Hello. I just wanted to ask a little bit further about people who are really underweight. There's a great store that young people, especially young women, place in being stylish, and the current style is very, very underweight, and I just wonder where those statistics actually fall on the continuum.
Yeah, good question, and of course, that's a serious problem in the U.S. and worldwide, and when you see a magazine where a model has been airbrushed, you know that we have serious self-image issues and body image issues in the United States, and the persistence to decrease body mass. And I mentioned earlier in the body mass index, less than 18.5 is considered abnormal. And if you look at the mortality, like I showed you, the mortality associated with increased body mass. But if you look at that across all body mass indexes, it's what we call a J-shaped curve. So in other words, as you decrease body mass below BMI below 18, there's an increase in mortality. And I mean that's such a multi-layered societal problem. But and actually I get it. I mean there are individuals because of so many factors, social, employment, discrimination, wanting to, being bullied, for not being normal or super lean is just a multi-layered problem. It's such a multifaceted problem that has to be addressed. But the issue of malnutrition, I was a cross-country runner in college, and of course no gender bias here meant at all. But we had a number of our female cross-country runners who were amenorrheic, and if you look at the long-term profiles, I'm old now, so I remember Greta Weitz, who won the New York City Marathon and was an outstanding distance runner. And if you see her today, she creeps around with a big dowager's hump, and she's got terrible, terrible osteoporosis. So thanks for bringing it up, because it is a J-shaped curve with body mass index, and it's a problem beyond all of our pay grades. But when I said about one of those important messages was it's okay to be overweight as long as you take care of your physical activity patterns and other health behaviors. Make sure your blood pressure is okay, and don't start smoking to lose weight, which I actually had a patient once who did that. I was stress testing him, and I was doing his physical exam, and I said, "So do you smoke?" Because I ask everybody that. He says, "Yes, I'm up to 2 packs a day." I'm like, "Excuse me?" And so his physician, I presume, tongue in cheek, told him that if he smoked, he would his metabolism would go up, he'd lose weight. So he said, "Do you like it?" And he says, "I hate it." I'm like, well, stop. You don't. It's okay. You actually can be, but that's the social intersection and societal intersection is really problematic. And by the way, I would invite any of my colleagues here who know a lot more about this than I do to respond as well. So, how about those centimeters and inches? Huh? Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned pear shape versus apple shape. Is that purely genetic, or does where fat store on your body?
Oh, there's a huge genetic component to that. Okay. No question. Yeah.
But is it also food you eat?
But I'm sorry?
Is it also the food you eat, like a type of foods you eat? Does that affect
not so much. And I want to point out, by the way, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm an omnivore, dang it, and I happen to believe that, and maybe that came through in the last couple of slides where we talked about as society, we ate pretty much everything that flew across, everything that flew and ran past us or swam in the water, we ate because we needed calories. But we burned 8,000 calories a day as well. And now we died of influenza, so we never knew if we'd die of cardiovascular disease first. But I'm betting that, trust me, I am betting on myself that omnivores, if you don't have other other issues like lots of people do have today, because the legumes, Mediterranean diet, no question that has a powerful influence on longevity and compressed morbidity, but eggs, butter, unprocessed meat, out of jail. And I mean that. And there's a really great paper. It was in circulation about 3 years ago now that looked at the consumption of processed and unprocessed meats, and it was a large study, and they looked at the risk of diabetes, hypertension, diabetes, stroke, and myocardial infarction, and for those who are eating processed foods, ham, salami, processed meats, had a 43% increased risk and those who were in the unprocessed meat consumption, reasonable unprocessed meat consumption, had no appreciable increased risk. So I think you live in Montana. If you know, if you're okay with beef and you know, and you buy it from your farmer, you know who your farmer is, that's what we do. I think and you're physically active, because excess meat consumption, there are other health issues. Okay, let's be clear about that. But I think the pendulum has swung back more to the middle, and so not that and Mediterranean diet is still like an optimal diet for people who are just like, I got to be all about that. But people shouldn't turn away from. I never turn away from eggs and beef and you know, because Jean-Louise Calmette was an omnivore, and she also ate sweets every day, right? So, which is interesting. I'll just say one last thing about this. Is there another question before? Oh, okay. I don't want to, because I don't want to eat up all the time. So I could tell anecdotes all night. My poor wife knows that better than anybody.
Thanks. So you talked about, you know, hypertension down, smoking down, and the big thing that's on the up and super high, you know, is physical inactivity. I was thinking, particularly when you mentioned statins, I've heard like a noticeable and really ubiquitous side effect is muscle pain. And maybe I think something else that's also gone up a bunch for, you know, for better or worse is chemical medicine. And that as a maybe like a corollary between, you know, I don't mean to paint an overly morbid picture, but the sort of sedated person who has low numbers, but is like, there's this, we lose our desire to move.
Yeah, I'm going to volunteer a couple things about it. I think your point's well taken. I'm going to agree and then just sort of like moderate that just a little bit, because I think that the incidence of muscle pain associated with statins is higher than it was, but we also have a lot more people taking statins. The other thing is, and this is like unpublished data conversation with clinical colleagues as well, but polypharmacy really matters with statins. In other words, there's data to suggest that if that's about all you're taking, that there's really a very low risk of adverse effects. And we always talk about things in a risk-benefit world. But when people are taking multiple medications and a statin, that really does raise the ante for adverse effects. But of course, now it's going to sound like I'm defending myself because I take my simvastatin, right? But for me, the benefit far outsees the risk. The other really, when you look at the data on statins, which was originally designed, well, it is designed as like, we're going to lower your cholesterol and we're going to improve your lipid profile through the use of statins. And so when we looked at over the years, when you look at the morbidity mortality data, what we see is that the benefit of the drug actually is more than you would expect with the lowering of the lipids. In other words, something else is going on. And what that is the relaxation of the endothelial lining of the arteries. And I know that's like, what the hell is he talking about? Well, the health of the interior aspect of the arteries, including the coronary arteries as well as peripheral arteries, the stabilization of those arteries is really critical, especially the coronary arteries, right, the ones in the heart. So that if you can improve it's called the endothelial function, if you can prevent those plaques or the buildup of lipid that's behind those walls from rupturing into the artery, if you can stabilize that lining that sort of holds it back, that's really important. And what's interesting about that is I feel like I'm a Nobel Prize winner now. Look at me. I know all about it. I discovered this myself. But when we discovered that improving endothelial stability was so important, it answered a lot of questions. The number one destabilizer of the endothelial lining is cigarette smoke, is vasoconstriction associated. So hypertension, smoking. Now the mechanisms for premature myocardial infarction really begin to add up, and one of the most powerful. Like I think you'll get the answer to this one because of all I've said tonight. But the most powerful mediator of endothelial function from a lifestyle perspective is physical activity. It totally it has a powerful effect on endothelial function. so that when you look at that increase in fitness and decrease in mortality, you say, why is that? Is it because like the fitness fairy came through the window and said, oh, Reed, you've been exercising. I think I will confer on you better health. Yeah, probably not buying that. But I am buying that stabilizing endothelial function is the really important element to that. I had another really important part to that I wanted to answer, and it slipped my mind as well. But your point's well taken. If you don't need a statin, I'll take it. And if you have a lot of, but it's a good conversation to have with your doc about like, okay, like in the big scheme of things, can I do that? But I do worry to a degree because I keep thinking, like everybody else, like surely there's got to be a serious downside to that drug. I don't know what it is yet. I think muscle pain can be that, and if you have muscle pain or if it, oh, I know what I wanted to say. And then I'll be done with this piece. And that is, there's a really good study, and if you email me, I'll send it to you. Kokinos and colleagues about 3 years ago, I think 3 years ago now, published data on what happens if you combine fitness and statin use. And when you, and so he looked at those who were like, took statin and no exercise, statin plus exercise, and then looked at fitness categories. And those who took a statin and had high fitness had an unbelievable reduction in risk. I mean, it's believable because it's peer reviewed, right? But it was just like, it just dropped off the table, which was pretty powerful. So if you send me an email, I'll send you the article too. It's really pretty cool stuff. So I'm not here to like sell statins, but I think for many people, like everything else, it's all about risk benefit.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because I may or may not have been accurate on anything I answered, but.
I think we're almost at the end of our time, so if you wanted to follow up, I think that Reed would take some questions down here in the front. Right?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to a couple of you, and unless you're going to say something negative, because I have a fragile ego.
So let's break up now and give a round of applause.
Thanks.